So I want to thank Itai for making me look in the dictionary for the definition of conscious, because I think that that's something that I feel it's something that is happening in many levels of society, that we're raising our consciousness. And I was very curious about this concept in relationship to city making, because we have to be aware of our cities, the sensations that we have through space, our thoughts, our surroundings, and to fully realize an awareness of what it is and what it means to us as humans. And so I was also curious to look into the definition of planning by the APA. And the goal of planning, obviously, has been about understanding and sort of organizing our environment to maximize the health, safety, and economic well-being of the people living in a community. And I kind of wanted to restate these definitions as a way of framing a little bit of how we have been doing the work at the Department of City Planning. We definitely look at, I would add that we're looking at the future of the city, but also we understand our job as a forum for having conversations with all the stakeholders and players in terms of making decisions about the future of our neighborhoods. We are a growing city, as many cities around the world. We have reached our highest population since the 70s, and we're expected to keep growing. And so the question is also who are we designing for? And understanding that New York City is also a city of immigrants. We have over 200 languages spoken here. We have a very varied cultural legacy. And so these are questions that we do ask ourselves all the time as we're trying to reach communities, but also then understanding the physical aspects of it and how culture integrates with place and how place integrates with culture and shift one another. We're also a waterfront city that I think everyone knows from history that New York City was a big harbor. It's a big harbor with a lot of trade. And as you all may be aware, we have been recapturing and really turning our face back to the shoreline and for multiple uses. In New York City, we have One New York, which is a very high level sort of guiding goals that include that we need to keep growing and we need to figure out how to do that. And part of the principles that inform that is about equity and access. We also are very much pursuing sustainability in many aspects and resiliency. And so while these are very high-level goals, that this is a pretty thick book for New York City, part of it is also, to me, as the director of the Urban Design Office at City Planning, there's a part of this that is the question of how does that translate into physical space? What does that mean for this physical space? And so we actually released about 2 years ago urban design principles for planning New York City. These are meant to be really high-level principles because we are so diverse, because these are meant to be accessible to everyone. And in a way, I kind of tend to describe them as a bit of a prompt to people to look at their environment and to think about their city through the lens, through these lenses. So obviously, we want to create or reinforce a sense of place. We want to create a city that is open and accessible to everyone, that is inclusive. We also think that our good urban design, it's about paying attention to details. I really love the image from Melbourne about how to transform a space. And at the end of the day, it is also about providing a sense of comfort. So in a way, I think that part of how we have been thinking about consciousness is also about how do we read our city? How do we help our fellow citizens to understand what guides decision-making, what are the intentions behind our efforts in terms of our vision for the city. There's the Housing New York plan that was released at the starting of the de Blasio administration. Clearly, this is number one priority. We have been thinking really hard about how to tap into development potential and where to grow the city. We are a transit-oriented city. We have been thinking about how people move, and that sharing resources is much better than not. And also thinking about neighborhoods more holistically. And I'll talk about that in a second. Obviously, place making is important, understanding what makes a neighborhood, what is there, and what are the strategies to amplify what is there. It's also very important. And actually, under this administration, we have the Neighborhood Development Fund, which means that city planning is not a capital agency. We don't really build projects, but this fund has given us the capacity to go to communities and think about improvements that we can go today, and that we can allocate capital funds for our city sister agencies to actually go and invest even before there's more development coming in. We have approved a series of neighborhood studies. These are the ones that we have currently in the books. They're trying to address different things. Some of them, as you'll see, are actually adjacent to waterfront communities or water bodies, which is one of the areas of the city where we're looking at with more attention. I also wanted to say that what we meant with more holistic approach is that we definitely, not that we think that we're the center of the universe, but in this particular case, we definitely need to, this Department of City Planning is the one sort of like bringing all of these stakeholders together to have conversations about what can the future look like in our cities. And so we do that through a lot of engagement. For us, that's a very important part of doing our work. And as I mentioned before, not just to tell, have the real goal behind these conversations is to kind of help the communities tell us the priorities, and we also understand what are some of the local priorities and how these things kind of interact with the other priorities for the city. We have started to do a lot of community events that are not just about planning, but more about, as I said before, really trying to engage with people in learning a little bit how to observe, how to appreciate some of the aspects of their community, and building a common language of communication so that we can understand each other better. We also have been going out with this plethora of agencies, so we understand that to look at the future, we can't just sit at our desk and imagine it. We really have to engage with many, many people, not just from the civil side, but also within our government. And ultimately, one of our, the DNA of New York is, and one of the things that we think about a lot is how do we create the appropriate mix of land use, and how do we look at land use as a very broad brush tool, because ultimately what we're responsible for are the zoning regulations. And so zoning regulations are the ones that are going to determine what happens on the ground floor, but also how big the buildings are and what kind of uses go in there. So we do want to promote walkability. We want people to be able to live in a ratio where they have access to their amenities and services and supermarkets and food. And so one example of this is New York, which was the first neighborhood study that we approved under the de Blasio administration. And as you can see here, this is showing that the strategy here was to think about the corridors, because there's a predominantly residential character in the middle of the blocks. And so what we wanted to look at as opportunities for growth and transformation was more of the commercial and mixed-use corridors. This is a photo of Atlantic Avenue today. It's pretty desolate. It used to be a manufacturing zone, and also, unfortunately, it felt more like a highway than a street. And so the vision was to really think about how do we grow, how it's also pretty large and well-connected corridor. So was to think about what kind of uses can go there, and also how that also helps to slow down traffic, to create more of a identity for this community, so that instead of being more of a divider, it was sort of like knitting together different areas. This is an example of how we think about details and public realm strategies. We really work with the DOT, Department of Transportation, Economic Development Corporation, and other agencies to think about how to improve connectivity and how people move throughout the city. And again, I think that one of the things that is really interesting to me, and that we have been exploring at the office, is to understand what are the level of details that help people read the city without necessarily being experts. I think that we all as human beings know intuitively when we feel safe, when we feel exposed, when we feel, and I think that I actually learned today even more in terms of how my brain is working when we do that. And so these are I think that part of what is interesting to me is that we have, these design principles that are very much about levels of lighting, sound, and in other words, amount of stimuli that it's at any place, and also sort of the aesthetic of it as a way of ensuring, again, quality and that places feel open and accessible. This is a typical sketch that we do where we go to a place and kind of try to parse out existing conditions and then what are the potentials for change in terms of achieving our goals. This is more of a neighborhood scale where we're also thinking about what are some, in this case, assets of an existing park that then got reconnected with a trail connecting different areas in the neighborhood. As you know, we also have privately owned public spaces. It's a program that started in the beginning of the 1961 resolution, which is that we trade more floor area for public space. And this has been definitely a heavily analyzed space, and one of the areas where we actually have been increasing requirements to ensure that they do become an asset to the city, and that they're just not an open slate of space, but more of a inviting and a refuge to pedestrians. Going back a little bit to the sense of ownership and consciousness, I think that part of what we've been doing lately a lot at the department is to actually build platforms and use the data that we have to actually give it back to all of you. I think the goal is to make it more evident and more open the amount of resources that are out there for everyone to enjoy, and what is the quality of these spaces. We also have been doing that with the Waterfront. There's a lot of city, state, and private efforts to open up our waterfronts. And along the same vein, we have also been sort of mapping it and giving a lot of texture to what is happening in these places so that people know that they're there and people can go and explore them on their own. In terms of coastal resiliency, that is a big chunk of our work today. We have been working on it since for the last 8 years, really understanding what is the risk and what are the strategies that we can do where we can preserve the quality of the neighborhoods that we like, the physical qualities, while also increasing our level of resiliency. And I want to end with the Comprehensive Waterfront Plan. This is a process that we do every 10 years, where we go out and talk to communities about visualizing what we want to do with our waterfront. This is very much starting right now, this effort. And so I do encourage you to go to our website and sign in to participate in our sessions. So with all of this, I think that for me, part of what is really interesting, or for us at the office, is to understand how all of these, the science and the efficacy of design strategies, what we think are good design strategies, and how that is really supporting well-being and mental health. And I think that this is the aspect of the work of what is exciting about the moment we find ourselves in terms of thinking about how we really tapping into our resources to create an environment that is really promoting better health for all of us. Thank you.